Chosen one. You can curse a mirror, but eventually it's going to reflect judgment. Let me be direct. There are people walking around right now twitching, broke, paranoid, hearing whispers at 3 a.m. Not because life's cruel, but because they tried sorcery on you. Yes, you, the soul they should have honored, but instead attempted to trap. And now the ritual didn't just collapse, it reversed. And the universe demanded evidence. You see, according to spiritual law, targeting a divinely shielded soul triggers a backlash that returns sevenfold. That's not folklore. That's cosmic law. And yet these people lit candles, murmured your name in the dark, tossed powders on photos like seasoning meat, thinking they could override heaven's decree. Spoiler, they failed, because you're not just guarded, you're encoded. And every spell they cast with corrupted intent became the noose of their own spiritual undoing. Now their lives are unraveling slowly, violently, and inescapably. Their witchcraft chapter closed with court papers, paranoia, and haunted bathrooms. You think it's a joke, until their lights flicker every night at 2 a.m. This isn't just karma, it's divine retaliation. And today we're going to break down exactly why someone's life is cursed permanently for daring to target what was sacred. If this message already speaks to your soul, subscribe, like this video, and comment 77 below. Buckle up, chosen one. What you're about to hear may be grim, but it's also the clearest proof that your protection is not just real, it's terrifyingly invincible. Number one, when they touched your timeline, they thought they were operating in secret. They believed that chanting in the dark, manipulating timelines with witchcraft, or twisting spiritual laws could slip past a design that holds you. What they failed to understand is that your assignment was written before they ever knew your name, and when they reached into your timeline without authority, the heavens registered it as a violation, not a clever game, but a cosmic trespass. The mechanics of that violation are not mystical accidents. They are legal triggers built into spiritual order. When someone tampers with your destiny, they aren't merely attacking flesh or circumstance. They are assaulting a preordained decree. That touch creates a record, a courtroom file in the unseen, and the attempt to rewrite or bind you activates a correction that begins to destabilize their own narrative. Proverbs 26 verse 27 says, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and he who rolls a stone, it will come back on him." That stone was their dark intention. Their interference didn't land on you and take residence. It bounced, carrying its own weight, and the law of cause and effect started writing their undoing in tremors. Your stillness in the face of their schemes wasn't weakness. It was jurisdiction. While they thought they were crafting your demise, the spiritual system logged the abuse and began the reversal. Common violation if you sense their life unraveling after they tried to touch your timeline. The next section will show how their shortcuts, those quick, illicit attempts to harness power over you, fractured their own alignment and set the stage for permanent misalignment. They thought they were invisible when they reached for your story. Picture a shadowy room, whispered names burned into air, and ritualistic intent drafted like a secret memo. Then the moment their hands crossed the invisible line, they didn't see the ripple go back. That first subtle internal shift, the one that felt like a chill over something they tried to control, was not paranoia. It was a signal from the higher courtroom that a trespass had been logged. You didn't just feel static or random opposition. You felt the aftermath of someone trying to rewrite the script of your life without authority, and the unseen system registered it. That touch, the attempt to manipulate your timeline through words, dark shortcuts, curses, or covert spiritual pressure, didn't land in secrecy the way they assumed. It created a filing, a kind of cosmic docket entry that began to align the scales in your favor long before their next move. Their strategy, aimed to derail, activated a built-in correction. That's where the truth begins. The attack did not fall flat into your life and take root. It bounced, setting the stage for their own unraveling as the divine architecture behind your assignment began to assert jurisdiction. There were years when the weight of the interference felt like a personal failure, a sign you were too sensitive, too exposed, too broken for full presence. You internalized a narrative that something was wrong with you because they kept trying to find you through their manipulations. And you didn't have the language yet to recognize that what you were seeing was not a flaw in your identity, but a pattern of other forces reacting to what you carried. You felt watched, diverted, held under an unseen pressure that kept making your progress inconsistent, relationships confusing, and opportunities tangled in delay. The emotional toll was real: guilt for surviving when their attacks intensified, shame for not being able to fix what they projected onto you, confusion over why truth about your purpose triggered so much pushback, that internal loneliness, where you held clarity while everyone around you echoed uncertainty, built a quiet fortress of self-questioning. It was in that pressure that your inner radar sharpened. You sensed their hand before their plans fully formed. You felt their intention before they spoke it. And you began to ride the tension between being targeted and bearing purpose. Then the lens flips and the confusion begins to arrange itself into pattern. What you have been attributing to personal flaws now takes on the shape of deliberate interference, an orchestrated series of touches against your timeline. Each attempt to reroute or suppress your rise, leaving trace signatures. In the same way Zechariah 3 verse 2 shows the accuser being rebuked, the presence of accusation against you was not neutral. It revealed a courtroom process in motion. Their attacking narratives, their dark rituals, their attempts at spiritual suffocation were not silencing you so much as they were exposing themselves to scrutiny by a higher court. The spiritual law behind your assignment has mechanisms. When unauthorized influence tries to bind or edit what's been decreed, a witness appears. You begin to see that the confusion, the derailments, the betrayals were not random misfires, but the pressure points where their interference met the infrared of divine oversight. That is the moment the invisible architecture becomes visible, not with loud thunder, but with the quiet realization that something was working to protect, correct, and reverse what was meant to hold you down. Subtle confirmations begin to accumulate like a hidden code, slowly coming into focus. The way their stories collapse and mirror timing to their own manipulations, the strange synchronistic exposures of their motives to the very people they use to advance them, the dreams that replay their patterns and show you the source, the sudden shifts in their demeanor right before their own systems crack. These are not coincidences. They are signatures of reversal. The energy you once absorbed as confusion now reads back as insight, because their undoing writes itself in the wake of their efforts to bind you. You notice that the narrative they tried to build about you, the one designed to control how others saw you, erodes from the inside out in their own circles, and the same pressure they applied to destabilize you destabilizes their own internal alignment. That pattern of pushback becomes proof. What they aimed at you is returning with weight to them, and what was meant to rearrange your future is instead rearranging their present. The subtle shivers you felt at the edges of their presence were early indicators that the system was already executing its response. Their attempts didn't land silently. Their stones came back, and you didn't even have to lift a hand. At the center of this revelation is the quiet confirmation growing in you that your intuition was never wrong. Your stillness was not weakness, and your waiting was not stagnation. What looked like inaction while their chaos swirled was jurisdiction asserting itself without drama. The internal alignment you're feeling is a result of the higher order reinforcing what was preordained while the unauthorized noise around you collapses under its own weight. Isaiah 54 verse 17, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper," begins to sound less like hopeful scripture and more like a legal override you inhabit daily. Their instruments of entrapment fail not because they stopped trying, but because your assignment carries a built-in countermeasure, a divine seal that activates when interference crosses the line. That seal didn't make you immune to pressure, but it made your peace responsive. It's the calm that arises when you recognize the correction unfolding for you, not to you. Your internal compass, once clouded by their noise, now proves its accuracy by how it orients you to the reversal unfolding in their systems. Safety is not external. It is a recognition that a higher jurisdiction has claimed your timeline and is enforcing its decrees quietly through alignment. As awareness deepens, you begin to reclaim the language of what was done to you and what has been undone on your behalf. The violation against your timeline no longer lingers as trauma that defines you. It becomes a recognized turning point stamped with authority. You see the violated attempt not as an ongoing wound, but as the hinge where correction swung into action. The recording of their overreach, the unauthorized touch, becomes the evidence that you are marked, and their unraveling is now part of the dossier that verifies your assignment's legitimacy. You begin to understand paradox. Their pressure confirmed your placement. Their push to reshape you exposed the value of what they couldn't control. The identity that survived the unwanted edits was the original design, and what they tried to write over has been restored, stronger, with the clarity that comes from witnessing the system correct itself on your behalf. The metaphor of the sealed scroll being unsealed in the right timing works here. What they attempted to alter was never erased. It was addressed, logged, and recalibrated to serve your rise. Your story begins to read less like chaos and more like a divine transcript being transcribed in real time, with their interference serving as both accusation and its own undoing. This is the first activation. The moment you stop asking whether their attack will define you and begin to declare that their attack exposed you is a pivot from passive witness to active authority. You move differently now, no longer defensive, not reactive, but declarative. The damaged narrative they tried to install becomes a platform you stand on to speak truth with ownership. You don't necessarily need to name their tactics publicly. You simply carry the result. Clarity, boundaries, and the power to redirect energy that once got tangled. That internal shift is the reclaiming a voice that was once muffled by their noise. The activation is subtle and strategic. Steps taken with the weight of understanding that the timeline they try to hijack has been reclaimed, and their attempt now lubricate your forward movement instead of delaying it. This is where you begin to walk in the permission that was always yours, not asking for permission from men or systems, but enforcing the momentum of what has been legally restored in spirit. You were opposed because you are powerful. Their attempts to touch your timeline without authority were not random accidents, but markers of recognition. The subconscious spiritual alarm that watched your assignment and tried to reroute what it feared. Their destabilization of you was meant to hide you. Instead, it exposed the very mechanisms that hold you. Common violation if you sense their life unraveling after they tried to interfere. And add a reflection about the moment you realize what looked like assault became evidence of protection. The next section will expose how their shortcuts, the quick, illicit grabs for control, did more than fail. They fractured their own alignment and set the stage for deeper reversal, teaching you how their attempts to commandeer your authority actually delivered a map for your escalation. And if you feel called to go even deeper, there's a sacred space reserved for our community. A private room where you receive full prophetic messages daily. Join our private membership through the link in the description and walk this path with us. Special thanks to current members. Your presence holds this frequency and keeps the unmasking moving forward with clarity and covenant. Number 2, temporary sorcery, permanent misalignment. They reach for shortcuts. In the desperation to control what they perceive as your rise, they try to bypass the way to destiny with stolen rituals, dark pacts, and quick spiritual manipulation. Thinking that if they could push you off balance, you would fall, and their own narrative would prevail. What they didn't see is that illicit power always carries a debt, a spiritual misalignment that slowly erodes the soil under their own feet. Temporary sorcery feels potent at first. The whispered words, the salt circles, the hidden marks. There's a surge of false sense of control, but underneath it all the alignment begins to fracture. This fracture is not visible in the beginning, because their tactics mask the rot with momentary movement. Galatians 6 verse 7 is operating here. Do not be deceived, God isn't mocked. For what one sows, that will he also reap. They sowed manipulation, envy, and spiritual violence. What they are harvesting is disorientation. paranoia, broken flow, and a creeping internal collapse that feels like curse, but is really the natural consequence of misaligned investment. Their attempt to shortcut divine process made them unstable. The system that governs true authority rejects the counterfeit resonance, and over time their lives become brittle. Jobs that were supposed to stabilize fall apart. Relationships turn toxic under unseen pressure, mental unrest grows, and their internal compass deteriorates. Their own instruments of power become evidence against them, collapsing inward because the foundation was built outside of covenant. Comment misaligned if you watch someone who tried to manipulate you deteriorate under their own weight. The next truth coming is revealed to backfire. The boomerang of intent that doesn't dissipate but loops back with amplified judgment. The first thing that loosens in you is a cold, low-grade awareness that something in the background was never meant to be there. It wasn't a loud attack, but a series of small distortions, plans that stalled inexplicably, people who turned from allies into question marks, a momentum that broke in subtle, repeated ways. That quiet realization is the beginning of the conflict emerging. They reach for shortcuts to interfere with your trajectory, thinking they could engineer your fall without getting caught in the gravity of what you carry. Their moves were hurried, slick, shiny on the surface, a whispered curse, a manipulated narrative, a ritual passed off as coincidence. But the spiritual temperature around you changed, like a weather system shifting before the storm arrives. You felt the misalignment before you named it. Something was operating under the surface, pushing against your rising current, not random friction, but targeted interference designed to disrupt the rhythm of your assignment. That subtle heaviness, the static in your thinking when clarity was near, the small cracks forming in the trust you place in systems, they weren't accidental. They were the first pulse of their attempt to short-circuit what was ordained in you, and your sensitivity to it was the beginning of awakening to the fact that you were being maneuvered around because you mattered. The emotional pressure that followed was a slow tightening, a sense that you were always too much for the spaces you occupied, and never quite enough of the ones expecting you to perform on their terms. You carried the weight of being misunderstood while watching those who wanted to shape you in their image suffer under their own self-made chaos. There were days when shame attached itself to your intuition, when you heard the warning bells and were told you were paranoid, when you felt boundaries melting under subtle gaslighting and were left doubting your memory. That internal loneliness came from a place where the mechanisms used against you were invisible to everyone else, and you felt like you were carrying a secret language of sabotage that no one gave a translation for. The confusion turned inward, forming loops of self-questioning. If I'm truly called, why is everything around me so fractured? If I'm meant for elevation, why are my supports coming undone? Those emotional triggers, rejection from people you try to trust, cycles of being pulled in and then pushed away, the undermining from shadows pretending to help, built a tension that felt like a personal malfunction instead of a spiritual targeted response. You were learning beneath the shame and isolation to distinguish what was your trauma from what was their interference. Then comes a deeper view. This pressure was not random, and it did not arise out of nothing. There were structures reacting beneath the surface. Spiritual systems, generational anxieties, unseen protocols in the realm of influence that perceived your potential and moved to control it through shortcuts. In the ancient stories, exile and wilderness weren't just punishments. They were places where identity and calling were tested by the forces that opposed their fulfillment. Your wilderness wasn't a void of failure. It was a contested ground where the adversary tried to reroute a flow that had divine permission. That resistance, unexplained setbacks, sudden betrayals, inner storms, came from the way forces aligned against your rise tried to insert their own unauthorized edits into your timeline. These were not isolated bad days. They were the echo of a higher-order battle in which your emerging purpose was being sensed and threatened by those who preferred the status quo over the shift you represented. What you initially thought was personal failure now reveals itself as spiritual pushback because something in you is too aligned with destiny, to be left unchallenged. As the fog clears in moments of reflection, patterns begin to appear like a series of lights turning on in a darkened hallway. The same types of people returned with similar distortions. The same betrayals showed up in different forms. Obstacles that seemed disconnected were actually part of a repeating blueprint. Situations that once seemed like random bad timing now look like a calibration of their attempts to rewrite your story while exposing their own instability. You begin to see how the quick fixes, the manipulative narratives, the clipped advice from those pretending to help became temporary scaffolds for their own unraveling. There's a clarity in realizing that their interference always had a predictable decay. Relationships they injected with control collapsed from within, plans with your name in them dissolved because their foundation was counterfeited, and their insistence on keeping you small reveals their fear of your actual potential. That light turning on is not judgmental, it's liberating. It gives you context for surviving under their tactics and shows you how those same patterns can't hold long when the deeper structure of your destiny begins to assert itself through awareness. Then the resistance shifts from being an unseen vibration to something you can feel physically and spiritually. The air thickens around certain conversations. Fog descends when you're about to step into clarity. Opportunities that once flowed freely get clogged like a river dammed by a hidden force. This is the moment spiritual resistance becomes visible. It's not always a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's the small things. Your energy drained after being in a room where others project fear. The inexplicable silence when you try to speak something true. The way closed doors align with a sense that your frequency is too potent for the old patterns to accommodate. Heavy air. Watchers that feel like presences observing your move. The slowing down of progress without apparent cause. These are spiritual saboteurs reacting to your rise. They are not always malicious in intention. Some of the interference is built into old covenants and learned distortions that act like filters skewing your resonance. Their distortions start to look like signs that your light is doing its work, because darkness only shifts when threatened by clarity. That pressure reveals the hidden architectures. It makes the sabotage legible, and for the first time, you don't blame yourself. You name the distortion, and the act of naming begins to unwire its grip. You adapted. The natural reaction to being pushed, redirected, misunderstood, and gaslit was to shrink, to mute, to appease, to keep playing a role that would buy temporary peace. Some of you quieted your voice when you felt them reaching into your timeline, convincing yourself that staying small would keep the interference from escalating. Others rebelled quietly, carrying a simmering defiance that never fully erupted because exposure felt dangerous. Still others overperformed, giving energy to narratives that weren't theirs in exchange for the illusion of control. There was survival in every one of those responses, not weakness. The part of you that people criticized for being too much or too quiet was actually operating in the only way your spirit knew how to preserve the core of the calling while the external pressure tried to distort it. The fear of standing out, the urge to dial down instinctive authority, the temptation to give up because the cost seemed too high. Those were mirrors showing you what needed redefining, not condemning. Understanding your own defense mechanisms without guilt is a pivot point. It allows you to stop reacting from conditioned survival and begin responding from sovereign alignment. The tide turns when the resistance is no longer a source of discouragement, but becomes confirmation of your mark. What they intended as roadblocks become refractions that show the light of your calling from unexpected angles. Their pressure exposes the weight of what lives in you. The things you were ashamed of, your sensitivity, your strangeness, your refusal to conform, become the very facets that the opposition tried to dull and now cannot contain. Reclamation begins in reclaiming a voice, in a refusal to apologize for frequency you carry, and in the refusal to let their narrative define your destiny. The revelation that their sabotage never meant you were wrong, but instead affirmed that you were significant transforms the energy inside you. You begin to speak with prophetic edge, not because you are louder, but because you no longer bend. Your stillness holds jurisdiction. The language of your internal story shifts. The question becomes not why me, but what now? You're no longer waiting for permission. You're taking back what was always yours with fierce clarity. You were opposed because you are powerful. Their attempts to shortcut, control, manipulate, and silence you were not evidence of your insignificance. They were signs that the system recognized your threat to old orders and tried to reroute what they couldn't contain. The more they tried to dim you, the more the pressure exposed the capacity in you to remain anchored. Their misalignment didn't just fail against you. It fed the narrative of your rising authority, because the energy they poured into undermining you became the contrast that sharpened your identity and purpose. Comment misaligned if you've watched someone who tried to manipulate you deteriorate under their own weight, and at the moment when you understood their failure wasn't your victory. It was a clearing that allowed your activation to breathe. The next truth coming is a reveal of the backfire, the boomerang of intent that doesn't dissipate, but loops back with amplified judgment, making their undoing a marker that propels your dominion forward. Mid-video CTA. Mid-video CTA. And to every soul who supported with a super thanks. Thank you. You are keeping this light alive for others who haven't found it yet. If you feel called to help this mission reach more chosen ones, tap the super thanks button below. Your energy supports these messages and helps them travel further. Your voice matters, and your light is felt here. Number 3, energy returned as judgment. Have you noticed the nervous system cracks in those who attempted to curse you? The paranoia at 3 a.m., the whispers of their own conscience echoing back louder, the construction of schemes that dissolve in their own hands. None of that is random. Their dark intent didn't disappear in the void. It returned as judgment, and the instrument of that return is divine physics. When they aimed corrupted energy at your destiny, they tied themselves to that vibration. The same energy they shot out, without your engagement, found its trajectory back to them tenfold. Because spiritual law does not allow mockery without consequence. Psalm 7 verses 14 to 16 describes the plotting of the wicked, how their devices fall upon their own heads. Their violence returns to them. That's the mirror they look into when the curse they cast against you begins to fracture their own life. Their mental unrest, their unraveling relationships, their sudden financial collapses, their inner voices and health breakdowns. All of it is a reverberation of the boomerang effect. You, by contrast, were still. Your calm was not passivity. It was spiritual jurisdiction being exercised. While they scrambled in their self-made turmoil, the spirit realm processed the evidence of their violation, allowed the energy to loop, and now their undoing writes itself without you having to strike. Your presence is a quiet verdict. Their collapse is the sound of the system correcting the imbalance they introduced. Comment judgment if you've seen someone implode after targeting you, and add a reflection about how their unraveling confirmed your covering. The next section will show how their attack, intended to silence or weaken you, becomes a raw material for your elevation, transforming Hex into hierarchy. There was a moment when what once looked like their success began to fracture under its own weight, and you felt a tremor of confirmation ripple through your inner world. That shift in perception, the one where you stopped feeling guilty for the chaos and began to sense the pattern, was the first sign that the energy they sent toward you was bending back. It was subtle. Their confident posture began to twitch in the quiet hours. Their carefully constructed narratives started to collapse in unpredictable ways, and the people they used to rely on suddenly mirrored their own confusion. The silence you kept while watching them build their schemes was not passive. It was the stillness of one who is witnessing spiritual physics at work. The dark intents, the whispered curses, the manipulative strategies did not vanish into nothing. Instead, they attached like seeds to the originator, and the recoil began to show. That internal shift, when sympathy turned into comprehension, and you realized their unraveling wasn't random but reflection, marked the emergence of a new layer of clarity. You started to see their decline as a spiritual echo of what they tried to impose, and the world, in small uncanny ways, began to align with the truth. What was thrown at you was returning to them, not because you willed it, but because the laws beneath the surface were correcting themselves. In the pressure of daily life, it's easy to internalize their noise as evidence of your own vulnerability, to ask why someone would escalate their attacks when you stayed quiet and aligned. That emotional pressure, feeling like their increasing instability was somehow your burden, has been part of the inversion they hope to produce. Instead of collapsing under their manufactured crisis, you held space and absorbed the paradox. Their attempt to destabilize you were being processed in a system you didn't control, and their unraveling was quietly validating the place you stood. You remember the nights when their accusations grew louder even as the foundation of their own lives shifted beneath them, when their hidden manipulations created internal guilt in you because you sensed the tension but had no vocabulary to explain it. That pressure came with shame, confusion, and the temptation to respond in kind, to fight the loudness with loudness. But staying present without mimicking their rhythm allowed you to witness the distortion in its natural decay. The emotional landscape that once made you question your own identity now provides a baseline for a new understanding. Your stillness was not weakness. It was a terrain on which their judgment unspooled. When the veil lifts enough to see the structures behind their unraveling, it becomes evident that this isn't mere coincidence or a bad season for them. There were hidden spiritual contracts, misaligned shortcuts, and theft attempts woven into their strategies. Efforts to redirect your assignment by attaching themselves to your frequency. What they fail to account for is the way their own energy, once unleashed with corrupt intent, remained tethered to their vibration. In ancient metaphors like the one in Psalm 7 verses 14 to 16, the wicked build snares, only to find that their own devices become traps to themselves. That is the sacred mirror being held up to them now. Their schemes, designed to entangle you, wound them. The energy that was sent out with malice reconnected to its source in a loop of spiritual momentum. This mechanism is not a simplistic karma in the casual sense, but a divinely ordered response system, an invisible referee that senses when the rules of covenant and assignment are violated and begins the recalibration. You were under siege, yes, but not abandoned. The sister was taking notes, and their violations were generating the counterweight that would dismantle their own internal stability. The clarity that arises when their undoing becomes undeniable is a quiet kind of confirmation, a stacking of signs that point to the same truth. What they targeted in you has survived, and their targeting is now the source of their own fragmentation. You begin to notice how their mental landscape shifts in ways that mirror what they cast outward. Paranoia echoing the fear they projected, confusion arising from the manipulative lies they spread, relationships cracking under the weight of the very control they exerted, their financial collapses, their health symptoms that have no easy medical explanation, the increasing sense of being hunted by their own conscience. These are not isolated failures. They are the reverberations of energy returned with compound force. The more they poured into trying to defame, bind, or divert you, the more their internal compass derailed. Because the system that governs true spiritual alignment rejects counterfeit interference. Your presence remained steady not because you were oblivious, but because you were anchored in something that recognized the loop forming around their disruption. This is the moment the unjust attacker becomes the unwitting architect of their own exposure. And you, by contrast, stand in quiet adjudication. There's a different kind of spiritual safety that emerges when you realize the judgment is carrying its own witness. You begin to breathe easier not because the attack ceased, but because their collapse bears the signature of divine writing, the breaking down of their control structures, the silent erosion of their credibility, the crumbling of alliances they built on manipulation. All of it has a sound, and you feel in the core of your knowing. That peace is not static. It's the sensation of alignment, catching up to what has been true about you all along. The inner voice that once feared retaliation now speaks with the authority of experience. The universe doesn't need you to fight their battles. Its laws will process the imbalance they introduced. What they meant to use to define you becomes the evidence that you are defined by something deeper. You no longer chase validation from the broken frameworks that try to rewrite your identity. Instead, you witness a correction unfolding and let it reverberate outward as proof of jurisdiction. The narrators of your life who shouted the loudest fade into background noise, while their own internal unraveling becomes a punctuation mark that affirms your continued rise. As the revelation saturates, reclamation begins not by taking up their tactics, but by reclaiming your voice from the space they attempted to steal. Their self-inflicted confusion becomes the foil against which your clarity stands in relief. The part of you that hid in the shadow of their accusation steps forward. You begin to speak the truth of your trajectory with the calm certainty of someone who has seen the circuitry of the attack and the reversal. The energy that once bowed under pressure now moves with quiet insistence. Your boundaries are no longer negotiable because you understand that what they tried to distort was never yours to lose. They merely expose the strength of what lived inside you. That reclamation is fierce, not because it's loud, but because it's rooted in the realization that their judgment was their own doing, and your rise is the evidence of what they couldn't erase. You're no longer reacting to collapse around them. You're using it as a reference point, a testimony, a signal to others that their misalignment does not define what the higher order has already decreed for you. You were targeted because the vibration you carry threatens outdated systems and broken narratives, and their attempt to push back have only confirmed the weight of your assignment. The more they tried to wield temporary sorcery, the more they tied themselves to entropy, allowing the divine physics of energy return to operate without interference from you. Their unraveling isn't a detour in your story. It's a signpost, a redemptive realignment that sharpens your path. Their dismantling makes your frequency more legible to those around you who have been waiting for proof that the hidden current beneath their own struggle is real. Comment judgment if you've seen someone implode after targeting you, and add a reflection about what moment their collapse confirmed your covering. Share the vision, the dream, the internal knowing that shifted anxiety into assurance. The next section will take this momentum further. How the very attempts meant to silence you are being converted into the building blocks of your throne, turning what was hexed into hierarchy and propelling your visible dominion. Number 4, from hex to hierarchy. What they meant to bind you became the very chain that elevated you. The witchcraft, the curses, the attempts to twist your destiny turned into transmutation engines. Each malign word, each dark formula, each spiritual ambush fed the refining of your authority. Instead of breaking you, their efforts constructed a higher resonance in you. Every misaligned spell sharpened your discernment, expanded your jurisdiction, and deepen your unshakable identity. The transformation is a kind of alchemy. Hex becomes hierarchy. The origin story of the attack rewrote itself from victim narrative to sovereign elevation. You now walk with clarity that bears witness to the reversal. The shadow they try to cast over you backlit your purpose. Zechariah 5 verses 3 to 4 shows a flying scroll carrying a curse, marking wrongdoing and ultimately exposing theft and falsehood. What was sent to darken their path now carries its own witness, exposing their misalignment and driving the unclean out of their own systems. That same divine mechanism made their devices collapse while your peace expanded. Your stillness is no longer silence. It is podium, and your rise isn't loud because it doesn't need to be. It's felt. What was intended as a trap is now the foundation of a deeper anointing, a seal of proof that their violation of your timeline didn't derail you. It crowned you. Comment alchemy if the attack against you became the platform for your increased authority, and share a moment when the reversal felt undeniable. The stage is set. What they built to curse you now broadcasts their own exposure while your dominion amplifies. There's a question burning now that has no room for hesitation. Will you let what was aimed to break you become a throne that defines you? That moment, when the old story of victimhood meets the new reality of crown authority. It is the sacred crossroads. The choice is not between reacting in bitterness or pretending nothing happened. It is a sharp, sovereign pivot to see their attack not as injury, but as initiation. You no longer whisper the past to survive it. You speak it to activate what was always latent. The hex they cast, the dark formulas they deployed, the smears, the secret accusations. Each one was meant to trap your movement, to sow confusion, to dim the light you carry. Instead, you made a decision. The energy they threw at you would not define you. It would refine you. That internal turning is a threshold where survival recedes and dominion rises. You are choosing hierarchy over hex, authority over apology. The question now is not whether you were cursed, but what you will do to crown the undoing made visible. In the fire of that decision, you begin reclaiming what was stolen, not by vengeance, but by declaration. Every ounce of energy you once poured into explaining, defending, apologizing, or shrinking is called back. There's a ritual here, whether spoken or felt. Uncover the places where their dark intent embedded doubt, name the lie, and pull back the narrative they try to write over your identity. You do not beg for restoration. You command it. The seasons of silence where you absorb weight become the seasons where you release it, pulling the scattered fragments of voice, time, and presence into one center authority. You speak the truth of your assignment out loud as a covenant. The language of your soul shifts from, I survived their curse, to their curse crown me. That reclamation is precise. It is not messy or reactive. It is purposeful, an anointing spoken into the atmosphere that resonates with the original design that they try to override. The throne is not a future possibility. It is the present reconstitution of power they attempted to dismantle. Now name what lives in you, what others called psychic sensitivity, brokenness, or oversensitivity is actually your attunement to the recalibration happening beneath the surface. You carry the fire that burns false constructs and a discernment that smells counterfeit intentions from a distance. The curse intended to blind you became the lens through which you now read spiritual code. Their maligned energy, aimed to limit, was rerouted into your immune system. Every attack strengthened borders, sharpened insight, and deepened the unshakable core of who you are in divine assignment. You walk with keys in your hand, keys made from the very patterns they use to try to lock you down. That nickname they gave you in the wake of their sabotage is now your banner. What was once damaged is now the signature of a calibrated authority. You are armored not by avoidance, but by integration of what was meant to derail. The insight you now carry is not abstract teaching. It is a living code. This is the alchemy. They aimed to hex, and you turned it into hierarchy. Their dark formulas become the geometry of your jurisdiction. The path ahead isn't a guessing game. It is under your feet, revealing itself with each step taken in alignment with a new frequency. You don't need to chase the next move. The next move is summoned by the authority you now embody. What they try to trap becomes a platform from which you step into broader territory. The reversal isn't passive. It creates motion. Doors that were once closed from their misalignment open with a different sound now, because your presence carries the proof of reversal. Prophetic clarity arrives not as a dream of future power, but as a felt momentum. You move, the map writes itself, and the world adjusts around the cadence of your rise. The transformation from hex to hierarchy gave you a new kind of compass. You no longer drift waiting for permission. You walk because the path materializes under the weight of what their attempted curses cleared away. This is direction with consequence. Every stride is a declaration that the reversal is not temporary. It's structural. When your rise becomes visible, it does something to the field around you. Others have been carrying hidden wounds. Their own attempts at survival under pressure begin to feel the shift and are pulled into alignment without needing you to explain. There's a magnetic convergence. Soul tribes rearrange, divine clusters awaken, and spiritual alliances that once seemed theoretical begin to anchor in real time. Your hierarchy doesn't isolate, it activates. The transformation you embody turns their old systems into staging grounds for collective elevation. People who once tried to dim you now feel the undertow of your authority and begin to recalibrate their own lineage code, because your reversal creates space for their remembrance. What was personal becomes communal. The hex that tried to block generational flow now serves as a hinge that unlocks ancestral power in others. Your movement writes permission for the ones behind and beside you to unseal, making your dominion a beacon rather than a fortress. There's a ceremony in how you now manage your energy. This is not about becoming harder. It is about becoming sacredly selective. Boundaries are no longer threats to connection. They are the guardrails of your transmission. You steward your presence like a temple keeper. That which once scattered under pressure is now concentrated in clarity. You learn to say no to old triggers, to reclaim attention spent on broken narratives, to anchor in what the reversal has activated instead of reacting to what tried to undo you. Alignment requires choices that reflect origin, not obligation, and devotion that sustains the authority rather than depleting it. You are entrusted with both restoration and multiplication. The energy you command builds, it doesn't leak. This level of energetic command is a solemn vow. You will not allow their attempted hex to become a recurring wound. You govern a frequency they try to distort, and in doing so you keep the hierarchy in motion, not for ego, but for the ripple of legacy. Everything converges here. Your past resistance, their failed sabotage, the internal reframing, the public elevation. This is a final charge. You are no longer in rehearsal or defense. The prophetic announcement is simple and sharp. You are ready. The identities you carry to a fight were never the final forms. They were the preparation for this crown moment. There is zero room now for second guessing or waiting for external affirmation. The seal has been cracked, the hex transmuted, and the throne is activated in a way that doesn't need drama to be felt. The assignment is clear because the pain that once blurred has been converted into power that clarifies. You walk in a frequency that drops timelines into alignment. Your presence is a recalibration for what is acceptable in your sphere. The final breath before stepping fully through is this. Your elevation is not a reward for endurance. It is the execution of purpose, armed with the very evidence that tried to stop you. This is not an ending. This is the call. Comment alchemy if the attack against you became a platform for your increased authority. And share a moment when the reversal felt undeniable, a dream, a vision, a situation where what was meant to shame instead showcased your sovereignty. Let that testimony anchor others who doubt the hidden exchange between hex and hierarchy. The stage is set. What they built to curse you now broadcasts their own exposure, while your dominion amplifies. Next, the story expands. How your crown authority begins to rewrite lineage, drawing others into their own unsealing, and making your rise a hinge for generational elevation. A whisper from the deeper current of your life reveals the full picture. You were never meant to simply endure what was aimed at you. Every attempt to distort your route, diminish your identity, or trap your destiny was repurposed by divine timing into an activation of your throne. The story underlying your pain and their sabotage was never about falling down. It was about being tuned so precisely that your rise would carry weight, unmistakable and irreversible. They thought their curses would define you, but the designs they laid became the scaffold that holds your elevation. Divine law worked through their misalignment, turning their violence into correction against themselves and elevation for you. You no longer move seeking proof. You inhabit the evidence. The generational air around you breathes freer because the reversal sent ripples backward into lineage, dislodging inherited blocks and releasing new rhythms of authority. The peace that follows the fight, the quiet recognition from others who don't need to hear your whole story to feel your shift. They are the echoes of a cosmic reversal in motion. What was meant to silence you now amplifies you, and the world recalibrates around the destiny that was seen first in heaven. Your movement is an activation point. It makes the blueprint visible, turning what was once hidden into a public dominion of unshakable truth. A dream wakes you before the world does, not with answers, but with a sense of completion, that what you've been through was never wasted, and the pieces you thought were broken are now the exact pieces that make the throne undeniable. In that quiet hour when sleep lifts and the residue of visions hangs like morning mist, the deeper current whispers, you were never meant to survive the designs by accident. Their attempts to reroute, cancel, confuse, or diminish you were intercepted by a timing that has a blueprint behind it. What they pitched as sabotage became the precise frequency tuner for your rise. Each blow they intended to wound was folded into a pressure system that clarified your voice, sharpened the edge of your authority, and marked you with a weight that can't be shrugged off or mistaken for luck. The narrative beneath the pain was never about a broken you. It was about calibrating a permanent dominion that would make their interference the origin story of your elevation. Have you felt the contrast between how they defined you in the moment of their attack and how the world now responds to what their attack produced? There's a tension built into your story that reads like prophecy if you listen, an inner voice that once whispered, "They try to bury you," now says, "They gave you the foundation." Their curses, their secret maneuvers, their spiritual shortcuts designed to limit you carried with them a hidden seed. You absorbed the weight, and instead of it crushing you, it became the gravity that pulls others into your orbit. That emotional truth, feeling the sting of their intention while simultaneously sensing something rising in you stronger than a blow, is a pivot from confusion into clarity. What looked like evidence of your being marked for failure is now the very proof of your assignment's legitimacy. You no longer scramble to defend your space, because everything about your movement shows a reversal is not an anomaly, but a built-in response. A memory surfaces, not of a single moment, but of a long series of small moments where their voices tried to overwrite yours. In hindsight, those moments read like chapters of sabotage manual, each one meant to distract, shame, or redirect. Now, in the fullness of this awakening, you see the divine threading through those pages, how their misalignment triggered mechanisms that didn't just repel their moves, but redirected the momentum into your activation. The law beneath the surface did not allow their projection to settle without feedback. It turned their violent intent into a correction that reverberated back on them while simultaneously opening new frequencies for you. What was aimed to silence became the echo chamber for your incoming authority. Their strategy, seen now as the scaffolding of your elevation, carries its own witness. Elements of their own collapse are the callbacks, and your rise is a forward movement they never anticipated. The deeper truth is that they didn't accidentally empower you. The system redirected their offense into your ordination. A symbolic threshold appears in everyday life. Doors that were previously stuck now swing with quiet ease. Conversations that once felt heavy align with your voice, and the atmosphere around you subtly shifts as others sense the legitimacy of the activation without needing the backstory. That external alignment is not a side effect. It's the echo of a cosmic reversal broadcasting outward. The generational air around you changes too. Burdens that previously sat in silence begin to loosen. Inherited blocks tremble, and people connected to your line breathe differently because the reversal didn't stop at your individual story. What was recorded in the hidden realms as attack is now reflected in the visible realm as restoration, and that ripple moves backward, undoing tensions you've carried from ancestors who were themselves under siege. The elevation you embody does not require explanation because the field itself adjusts. The world begins to feel the shift and responds in kind, making the previously hidden blueprint visible through the tangible realignment of relationships, opportunities, and underlying peace. Your movement becomes a public proof of what divine strategy saw first. A whisper from the ancestral archive answers in a tone that feels like return. The interference meant to undermine your line instead unlock permission for generational release. That sacred memory, one that's embedded in bloodlines, in repeated patterns, in the unspoken pain, reawakens now not as weight but as leverage. Through you the current of reversal flows, altering timelines and fulfilling dormant vows that were carried like scars. The ripple is two-way. What was broken in your elders lifts as your activation becomes a new frequency they recognize and begin to match. This isn't a cosmetic fix. It's a systemic recalibration. The pressure their attempt applied to keep you small became the channel through which old constraints were exposed and then redefined. You are not only the evidence of your own rise, you are the hinge for ancestral upward movement. The ancestral code clicks into place not because you chased it, but because your own unshakable walk pulled it forward, recalibrating lineage identity to align with a destiny that was seen before birth. A vision settles in. The future ahead of you was never a blank space to be filled. It was a remembered horizon waiting for your steps to make it manifest. The activation you're experiencing isn't the creation of something new. It's the reclamation of what was imprinted, now being stepped into with clarity. You don't ask permission from fading systems. You reclaim what is already written. The prophetic call rising within you is not a whispered doubt, but a roar commission. What once required survival instincts now requires sovereign movement. The path isn't discovered by chasing signs. It solidifies under the discipline of your forward motion. Divine memory passes through your choices and makes the future echo the origin. Your rising is not an improvisation. It's a consistent unfolding of a prescripted power that their attempts tried to derail, but instead amplified. The world feels a shift because the future you carry was always meant to be visible, and now you are the living embodiment of its arrival. A wind of restoration sweeps through your inner landscape, and when it comes a fierce handing back, the things you once ceded, your time, your voice, your definitions, are returned and consolidated under a new governance. You draw the line where their old influence used to blur identity, and the energy that used to leak becomes control flow. That reclamation has a rhythm. You don't scramble for influence, you steward it. Your internal conversation changes from "can I" to "I will." The power they tried to mute is activated as authority, not by volume, but by weight. The subtlety of your presence now carries boundaries that are not walls, but declarations of what frequency is permissible in your field. You're not rebuilding from fragments. You are wearing a refinement like armor, letting it shine in stillness. This is a restoration that doesn't look back in regret. It moves forward with the certainty of a voice that's been given back. The final charge is simple and absolute. Your story has been rewritten by divine intention, using every blow against you as the ink of elevation. What they intended for your collapse became the legal documentation of your rise. You stand no longer in tentative recovery, but in activated presence. The tide has turned. The destinies around you begin to align, because you are moving as a fulcrum. This is not the time to hesitate or temper your sound for comfort. The authority in you is now audible because it's rooted in the reversal. The hex is no longer a shadow but a crown, and your hierarchy doesn't need defense. The assignment is not distant. It's immediate, and your next step is a vehicle that makes the blueprints public. You've been seen, preserved, and elevated. Now respond accordingly. This is the invitation, not the end. Comment reversal if your rise has begun to shift what was once held in silence, and add a reflection, a dream, a moment, a recognition. When you realize that their sabotage will become the fuel for your dominion, let that testimony pull others out of the waiting room of their own stories and into field of shared activation. The next phase is already aligning, where you become visible and begin to pull hidden thrones into the light, making your sovereignty the hinge for collective unsealing. This has never been about you taking a hit and surviving. It's about you walking through violation and emerging as a jurisdiction that heals, judges, and rules. Subscribe if you haven't yet, like this video, and comment, "I am chosen to let this message anchor in your soul." This message may not stay online forever. Download your copy and transcript in the vault, ideal for journaling, inner rituals, and sacred study. The link is in the description below. Share it with another chosen one who needs confirmation. Their attack is not their answer, and their undoing is already writing itself. Thank you to all supporting members. Your commitment keeps the frequency sharp and the reveals flowing. 4 full prophetic revelations daily. Join the membership via the link in the description. Your spiritual path deserves more than fragments. Step into the full light. And if this message moves you deeply, consider tapping the Super Thanks button to support the mission. Every Super Thanks fuels a reversal and the elevation we carry together. Rise in truth. Let the evidence walk ahead. The next truth reveals how your newly activated throne begins to pull others into their own unmasking. What was private becomes legacy.